as we continue our conversation about ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson, who Donald Trump is expected to nominate for Secretary of State. Speaking on Face the Nation Sunday, Senator John McCain said Tillerson should be given a fair hearing, but reiterated his concerns about Tillerson's ties to Vladimir Putin.
Ties are strictly commercial and got to do with his business in the oil business, fine. But we'll give him a fair hearing. But is it a matter of concern? Certainly it should be a matter of concern. But I'm sure that in a bipartisan way, he'll get a fair hearing. It's a matter of concern to me that he has such a close personal relationship with Vladimir Putin. And obviously, they've done enormous deals together, that would color his approach to Vladimir Putin and the Russian threat.
One of the enormous deals that Vladimir Putin and Rex Tillerson worked on was a $500 billion oil exploration partnership between Exxon and the Russian government's oil company, Rosneft. The Obama administration blocked the deal when it imposed sanctions against Russia for its intervention in Ukraine. In a recent column for Think Progress, headlined "Trump, Putin, and ExxonMobil Team Up to Destroy the Planet," Joe Romm, founding editor of Climate Progress, writes, "This deal could explain why Putin appears to have interfered in U.S. elections in favor of a Trump victory." Romm goes on to say if the sanctions are lifted, something a new Secretary of State could help make happen, it would pay off big time for Exxon. Imagine if the oil giant is free to produce and sell oil on the staggering 63.7 million acres of Russian land it leases, which is over 5 times the amount of land it leases in this country. Happy days are here again for Exxon, Joe Romm writes. Well, for more, we are joined by Joe Romm in Washington, D.C., who also was chief science advisor for years of Living Dangerously. So, Joe Romm, for people who have no idea what this is about, this Rosneft deal and the sanctions and what it would mean if they're lifted, please lay it out for us.
Sure. Well, Rosneft is the state oil company for Russia, and under Putin, it has been acquiring more and more power and control over the oil industry, and it is now, I believe, the world's largest oil entity in the world. ExxonMobil is the world's largest, privately held oil company in the world, and we're entering a period where it's harder and harder to find oil. And as I write in Climate Progress, ExxonMobil's prospects for finding, easy to find oil in this market were pretty dim until this deal was struck between Tillerson and Putin, basically. And this deal would have created a $500 billion joint effort, the biggest oil deal ever. It's $500 billion. We're talking $500 billion. This is a staggering amount of money. It was a deal that was perhaps going to ensure the future of a stream of oil for Exxon for decades to come, even, of course, as the world needs to get off of oil. For Putin, this is critical revenue and critical outside investment, because particularly now in this era of low oil prices, that seriously hurts Putin. So this was considered to be a game changer. Rachel Maddow said, this was a deal that was considered, it might change the historical trajectory of Russia. Now, Putin then invaded Crimea and interfered with Ukraine. As a result, the United States and most other civilized countries put in place sanctions. Those sanctions in 2014 killed this deal. And, as I write in the piece, the question of the intelligence community now says that Russia interfered in the election on behalf of Putin. That through leaks, through hacking private email accounts and releasing them, drip, drip, drip. And also, we have reason to believe they're one of the major promoters, disseminators of fake news. So one can understand the motivation. Some people said, hey, Putin has enough motivation just to, cast doubt on the U.S. election. But $500 billion, that is a very big motivation to mess up the U.S. election.
So explain what could happen if Tillerson did become Secretary of State.
Well, if Tillerson becomes Secretary of State, and I also want to say the man has no qualifications to be Secretary of State. It just deserves to be said. He's worked for Exxon Mobil his entire life. And I know we've entered this realm where we just elected, Donald Trump president who is unqualified, and he's been naming a series of people who are unqualified for their job. But it just needs to be said. So Tillerson has no qualifications for his job, and the deal that he was negotiating with Putin 2 years ago won him the highest order that Russia gives to a foreign citizen. So he and Putin are very, very close. And as Secretary of State, of course, he is our lead negotiator. He's the president's top representative to every foreign government in the world. So here's the signal it sends to the rest of the world. All that matters to the United States is oil and a friendly relationship with Putin. Now, this is a totally compromised Secretary of State. It is absurd. In any sane, rational world, this would just be round-the-clock pillory.
How could Tillerson decide about, for example, lifting the sanctions? What role would the Secretary of State play if he gets that job?
Let's look at the sanctions from two different. There's the U.S. sanctions, which the Obama can pretty much, which President Trump can pretty much lift most of himself. But then there's all the other countries who have sanctions. And in order to make a economic deal between Exxon and Rosneft, Russia, work, you're going to need not just allowing U.S. investment in the country. You're going to have to allow Russia, to make deals and sell oil with every other country. So as Secretary of State, he can simply make it his top priority to use the full leverage of the United States in every deal to benefit the oil industry, to benefit the U.S. oil industry, to benefit Rosneft, to benefit Putin. It's basically would be turning the U.S. State Department and the U.S. executive branch into what Russia is, a kleptocracy run by Putin and his gang to extract money and enrich themselves.
And Joe Romm, what about his own wealth? What about Rex Tillerson's own wealth? He is the current CEO of Exxon. If he retires and becomes president and becomes Secretary of State, still his money is tied up in Exxon, in what happens to Exxon, what the State Department and other government agencies, how they relate to Exxon.
Yes, and he would presumably divest. He would presumably have to sell off his $100+ million worth of shares of Exxon Mobil, and because of the way the law is written, he can do that tax-free. But I think it's important to say that, someone who has worked all his life at Exxon Mobil, all the way up to the top of the company, is hardly going to be able to separate his interests and the interests of all of his close personal friends and family simply by divesting himself of the stock. He is Exxon Mobil, and you should just see that on his forehead whenever you look at
Carol
it.
Moffett, we just have a minute, but you're seeing one agency head after another, one cabinet member named after another, related to Exxon, in fact.
Yes. If you look at Jeff Sessions, he intervened in the investigations of Exxon. If you look at Scott Pruitt, the nominee for EPA, he intervened in the investigation of Exxon by other state attorneys general. Then you add Rex Tillerson, and on climate change, what we're looking at is government of Exxon, by Exxon, and for Exxon. But it's really important to recognize that this is emblematic of a broader trend that we're seeing in Trump's nominations, where in one agency after another, he has put people in charge of agencies that are patently hostile to both the agency itself and to the people and places those agencies are designed to protect. It's looking to move us 100 years backward in time and undo 100 years of environmental and social progress.
And finally, Bill McKibben, one of his transition team representatives said today on one of the talk shows that this is a man who is very accomplished in business, so he'll be reviewing the budget of the State Department and, you know, who should be there and who shouldn't. We hear about the Department of Energy. Donald Trump just said he'll be deciding very soon after becoming president what to do about the Dakota Access Pipeline, which the Obama administration has said no to granting the final permit to, and the Keystone XL, which Eurogroup 350.org and so many others fought so hard until President Obama said no to the Keystone XL. Finally, what does this mean, and how is 350.org organizing?
2016 is the hottest year in human history, and we're going to have to make 2017 as politically hot as it is humanly possible to do. If people have been keeping their powder dry, waiting to come out and engage in peaceful protest, well, this is the moment. Everything is at risk, both in terms of our democracy and our planet. And so we will organize at 350, just as people will organize all over the country, and we'll do it not with complete confidence that we're going to win. We'll do it because we have to do it, and we will see what happens. This is one of those hinge moments in human history, and actually in planetary history too. I'm not sure there's ever been one quite like it, Amy.
Well, I want to end with a clip from Fox News this Sunday. Donald Trump interviewed by Chris Wallace on the pipeline.
Let me ask you a couple of specific questions. Will you still pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which has been signed by more than 100 countries to reduce carbon emissions? Will you restart the Dakota Access Pipeline, which the Army just stopped?
Okay, let me not answer the Dakota, because perhaps that'll be solved by the time I get there, so I don't have to create enemies on one side or the other. But I will tell you, when I get to office, if it's not solved, I'll have it solved very quickly.
Meaning you're going to start it?
I'm not saying anything. I just say something will happen, and it'll be quick. I think it's very unfair. So it'll start one way or the other. You'll have a decision pretty quickly. And also the Keystone Pipeline, you're going to have a decision fairly quickly. And you'll see that. Now, Paris, I'm studying. I do say this. I don't want that agreement to put us at a competitive disadvantage with other countries. And as you know, there are different times and different time limits on that agreement. I don't want that to give China or other countries signing agreements an advantage over us.
That's Donald Trump yesterday on Fox News. We will wrap up there. And in our next segment, we'll look back at the investigation by the Los Angeles Times and Inside Climate News into how ExxonMobil covered up its own knowledge of human-induced climate change. I want to thank Joe Romm of Climate Progress, Carol Moffat of the Center for International Environmental Law, and Bill McKibben, co-founder of 350.org. Stay